Ask Me Anything with PayU, and today's topic is on beyond funding. So before we go into the topic, I'm Mansa. I'm your host for the evening. I work in the marketing team as a marketing manager at PayU. So PayU, as you all know, is one of the leading payment service providers. We are across sectors like airlines, SMBs, and of course the startup community. The whole conversation behind doing these sort of sessions with startups is wanting to give back to the community. So we have a series called Upstart and Code Up. Upstart is for startup entrepreneurs and Code Up is for developers. While also Ask Me Anything is something that we are trying out every now and then when we get a subject matter expert or just someone who can talk about certain things, right? So we have Sridhar Raj here. He's a founder, he's a investor, he's a mentor, he's been in the startup and I think and he's been working for almost so long that he can actually tell us everything that you need to know. He's had experiences in the US, in India, and everywhere, right? So he's also been a speaker with Upstart before this when we used to do it offline as well. So that's how we sort of connected, and that's how I wanted Sridhar to come back and talk to us about this topic. So before we go into the topic, I just wanted to start off with this that we talk a lot about funding. So sometimes conversations are just about funding, right? I have hosted so many sessions here about funding, but isn't looking at startups, isn't this a lot more than just conversations around funding? Isn't scaling up a conversation that we need to have for a startup? Isn't something as simple as customer acquisition, because that's where your money comes in, right? All said and done. Isn't that also a conversation that we need to have? So that is why we have Sridhar with us today. He comes with a lot of experience, like I already told you guys. So please feel free to drop in your questions in the comments wherever you're watching this. So we are live on LinkedIn, Facebook, as well as YouTube. So drop in your questions. We'll see them on the right side of our screen here, and we'll pick it up and pose it to Sridhar. So Sridhar, before we start off, over to you. Please tell us a little more about everything else before we go into that conversation.
Hi, thank you, Mansa. Pleasure to be back and hopefully addressing a larger audience than we had at the co-working space the last time, 2 years ago already. So thank you for having me. Looking forward to interacting with folks. Really, like you said, with one word, it's all about giving back and sharing. Anecdotally, I would say, with as many examples that I could provide, I will. And things that I can't answer, will hopefully reach out to experts and get you those answers, offline, if not during the session. So, can I share my screen, or do you have? Okay, I'll try to do that. Can you see it?
It's up, Sridhar.
All right, thank you. So welcome everyone again. This is a session about Ask Me Anything Beyond Funding. So a little tag down there which says anything that Google can't answer, which Google can answer a lot of those. So hope to give you some real life examples. And I thank PayU again for hosting this session. Looking forward to this being helpful for both of us. So a little bit about me. This is not your typical profile. So all the wonderful things that I think I have done, but I would rather say I'm not your celebrity founder. I've not yet hit it out of the park. So no unicorns on my profile. I've pretty much failed a lot many more times than I have succeeded. And that is in the context of startups and founding companies alone. I do not have all the answers, so let me be blunt up front. My only claim to fame at this point in time are my battle scars. Definitely been through a lot, through a number of cycles, so I should be able to relate to some of those from a timeline perspective and give you context and give you answers, hopefully, that is helpful to you. And I am a work in progress. I actually wrote, that I don't seem to have learned from my own mistakes in the past, but I changed that to say I'm still a work in progress. So that's kind of a little bit about me. It's more disclaimer than anything else. And I know it's not your typical profile, but I'll give you my link in the last slide and you can connect on LinkedIn and see the detailed profile from a professional standpoint. So I thought of some ideas we could talk about, the problem, opportunity, and how to validate that. Customers and partners, obviously we talked about customer acquisition. Partners are as important. The team, which is definitely a priority one for most investors and most founders. 10x solutioning, everything has, you have to look at things when you're building products or services or addressing customer needs from a 10x perspective. That's a good topic I thought we could touch on. It's not just about starting up and getting going. It's about staying ahead of the curve, staying ahead of competition. Building that moat or building that competitive edge is very, very critical. So I thought that's another topic we could touch on. Scaling, obviously, never really easy, so that's something to talk about. Exit, not a lot of people talk about it, but exit is something that should be, I believe, on everybody's horizon. At least it should be on your radar early on, and it should be a focus as you start growing your business. I don't have the subject matter expertise in legal, finance, HR, and other areas. If you do have questions related to that, I'll try to address it. If not, we'll get that answered offline, like I said before. So these are my top 10. There's a little play on biblical play there, but you can ignore that. So I'll really run through this very, very quick in the interest of time. I really believe your network is your net worth. It's very, very important to have a very strong network in the domain as well as in the areas of both your weakness as well as needs. And LinkedIn is a great platform to start with and build your network. It's pretty amazing. The second point kind of follows that first one: seek and thou shalt receive. It's happened time and time again. I've reached out to people over the transom. I've reached out to people through the network, and there's always a lot of help out there, whether it's in opening a door, getting that first meeting with a customer, or identifying a partner, or validating your idea. There's a whole host of needs that will come up during your journey, and it's pretty amazing. You just need to ask. So that's something I would like to ingrain. So seek and thou shalt receive. Never burn bridges. That's something I am still trying to learn and mend my ways around. Hopefully you build a lot more bridges than you burn, and it's very, very tough, and it's about building those relationships that are long term, and people don't easily forget. So both the positive and the negatives, they definitely don't. So that's something very, very important. In that same vein or light is your word is your bond. So when you make a commitment to your employees, to your customers, to your partners, to anybody you really interact with, if you commit to something, honoring that commitment should be your priority one. So I think that's very, very critical. Again, like I said, people have memories that will surprise you. So hire for will, train for skill. It just rhymes well, but the reality is, the idea is you don't hire for skill. Even in the tech world, this applies, and I can talk more about it if you guys have questions around this. Learning is lifelong. I'm still a student, so even this morning, I had a couple of lessons come my way. So that's something. Humility goes a long way, but that is something that is the reality. So applying that learning is what helps you course correct during a journey as hard as starting up. So I really believe chewing glass is easier. I know a pretty famous entrepreneur said it's like chewing glass, but I think chewing glass is much easier than starting up and founding a company. Although the headlines these days probably make you believe it's a walk in the park, but that's my experience. Execution is everything. Can't repeat that enough times. I think that should be on the top of the list. Ideas are a dime a dozen. Execution is everything. So you can keep repeating that, probably every hour, and it's still something that should resonate in what you do. Listen more, talk less. Active listening is a great skill to develop. Very, very important. A lot of folks don't try not to tell you things directly. They're subtle about it. They're less direct. So you will miss the message, whether it be in conversations with your customers, your employees, your partners, what have you, your co-founders. It's very, very important to listen more and talk less, especially active listening. Fail fast so that you last. So the idea is maintain cash burn, live to fight another day. So experiment, put some, strong time boxes around your efforts. And when things are not really working, it may be important to step back and take a call. So that's the last of my top 10. Always leave folks with a quote. So here's one of my favorite ones. I think this summarizes everything that I would like to convey today. So you can read it. I'll not go through what Michael had to say, but having watched him in person many times, I'm a big fan. So this resonates very well with me. So go out there and try, make an impact, create value, and valuation should follow.
So what you mean to say is it should become probably a part of your everyday thought that creating value should be more important than anything else. While we see a lot of different things out there, but creating value is something that we always have to deliver on.
Correct. I think that should be almost your daily mantra or focus. So today should be, your value add to your customer, your partners, and your employees should be higher, greater than yesterday, right? I mean, it should be a +1 minimally.
Absolutely. I think now what we will do is you can keep the screen running. I will take it off of free stream, as in off the stream, while
Okay.
I ask you questions. Maybe
Sure.
we'll bring this last piece up at the end of the conversation again.
Sure.
Sure. So I do have a few questions, especially around the whole few things that you said we would need to talk about, right? So just something that comes to my mind. So how does a young startup, we hear about a lot of them these days, there's a lot of them who have already raised a lot of funding. Maybe they are young people who are working on a startup, or they are maybe their startup is sort of young, right? Like they are in their early stages. So what does a young startup have to keep in mind? So what are the few things that they probably have to do it? Because you have been an entrepreneur and you have been a mentor more than anything. So from that point of view, what do you think they should be doing?
It depends on the stage, right? I mean, if you say an early, so the rules, the basics will be the same across, but the focus will shift as they go through the cycles, right? I mean, if I would say if you're an early stage founder and if you're in the validation process, the things to watch out for are a little different compared to if you're in the next stage. You've raised some capital and now you're finding some traction and you're finding the product market fit, and then you're trying to narrow down your focus and execute, and then you're trying to scale. So the things to watch out for in early stage would be irrespective. I'll touch on the basics later, but early stage, I think it would be to the focus on the customer, listening to the customer feedback, really validating, not because you're hearing what you want to hear versus what the market is telling you, through pure data and action, right? Rather than what you think. People will always praise something or they will be positive about something, but then you need to see that there is utilization of your application, for example, or there is sales in an e-commerce platform, for example, or the number of customer negative complaints or number of customer issues are much lower. So those are some early KPIs that you could focus on to make sure that you have that early traction and product market fit. So that is in terms of, that's one thing. Underneath that, I would start early to say ethics, integrity, will take a huge priority. Um, um, it's not burn baby burn because you have raised someone else's money. It's also you have to run it like your household. I think that's very important from a culture standpoint. So again, it's important to hire the right talent, but at the same time you have to also find um, avenues that you could have alternate solutions as a startup founder, right? So you have to think, can I get this done? Can I get this problem solved in a very creative way? Can I barter with somebody to get the problem solved? Can I it doesn't necessarily mean being thrifty or low cost, but at the same time it's got to do with ensuring that there is value accretion at every stage, right? In doing something, whether you're building a new application or an extension to an application, whether you're investing in a new hire for something and then it's a very temporary experiment within a larger experiment, right? So those would be some things that you would look at from a basic standpoint. So that would be early stage, but then at every stage there are factors to consider. They kind of evolve from these basics, but they apply at a different scale, at a different level, at a different breadth, if you will. And the number of stakeholders keep expanding as you grow. So you have to apply this dynamically across multiple groups with different priorities. So that gets very challenging. So we can talk more as we go into the conversation about it.
Absolutely. I think that right about covers everything that an entrepreneur would need to do. So, again, how now coming to, we did speak about what they should do, right? Now coming to the revenue stream as to how do you get revenue from your customers. So, how easy, or I understand that it is a difficult game, but how easy would customer acquisition be if you did the right things? And what are those right things?
Um, uh, that goes back to those top 10 that I listed, right? It's very surprising.
Absolutely.
I've been very, very surprised by the fact that people are so willing to help you. If you have something to offer that solves their problem, and you reach out to your network and your network's network, at least 3 degrees, it is so amazing. People are willing to open their doors and at least have that initial conversation with you. Um, so doing those right things are really about, again, keeping that network alive, making sure the value proposition is laser focused, and that you solve a problem, you solve a pain point that is critical enough for them to be willing to deal with your shortcomings early on, as well as be willing to have a relationship with you longer term, right? I mean, so that there is revenue generation in a sustainable basis. So a lot of the early conversations, even in our recent experience, a lot of the early conversations, we avoided pricing conversations with people we were talking to. We didn't avoid it. We kind of never touched on it. We didn't even have a sort of a survey out there saying, what will you pay for this? Right? We were ballparking some of it based on industry standards, based on competition. There's always competition. Anybody who comes and says there's no competition, hasn't done enough market research. There is at a minimum, there is indirect competition. So it's very easy to benchmark and take a look at what a customer would be willing to pay, and what, depending on the problem area that you're solving and what value accretion it does for them. So I think it should leave no doubt in that sense. So those would be few things that I would do to address that.
Absolutely. I think that about gets there. So again, one more bit of I'm going through different aspects. Okay, so now going to team building. So you found your right, I think, co-founder. You wanted somebody. You sort of found the right mix of that person. But even getting your first team, your early team, is very important, right? Because they are the ones that stay with you. They are the ones that decide how your product or your service would look like. So, can you throw some light about that? Like, how does one get about to finding the early team?
So actually, that aspect was extremely hard and continues to be extremely hard for me. The reason it is because again, pedigree is very important. So if you have a schoolboy network of the triple letters or any of those, that really helps a big way. I mean, people misunderstand why there is value in those triple letters. The value in those triple letters is not because of the education that they are imparting. It is, that's a bonus too, but the real value is in the network. So that there is also I never had. I've been such a nomad all my life that I never had. I've come back to some age-old friends now, but they're all doing different things. So I can't drag somebody who's in the PCB design business to come do a B2B platform with me. It doesn't make any sense. I can't have a dentist come and do a B2B platform with me. I can't have, so they're all in different fields. So I've lost that opportunity, and it has been extremely hard. So what helped was going out there, networking, putting myself out there, looking stupid several times over, and letting people know that hey, you're walking into an experiment. Have zero expectations. I'm not making any commitments right now. This experiment will last X amount of time. These are the decision points. These are the timelines. If it works for you, come along for the ride, and see. So I don't fix roles very early. Those are some of the things. I actually leave a lot of people frustrated by doing some of these things because it's very ambiguous and people are not comfortable, right? I mean, you can tell right away. Folks who come from a 9 to 5 background, they don't know. They're so in a position of discomfort that they want to leave right away. So then folks who have gone through a few, I love folks who have tried something and then shut it down. Again, if folks are out here, at some point in time, I would love to chat with you on LinkedIn. So do reach out to me. I'm always looking for folks who have an interest in doing something and haven't been able to find the right traction or market fit or the team for whatever reason. So it's always good to network. You never know how our paths may cross. So it hasn't been easy at all, and it is very difficult. So I think the best, in my view, I always, and even when I recently talked to some of my co-founders and early participants in my experiments, I always say your biggest competition is two guys in an apartment hacking an app, right? Or so you've got a lot of co-living spaces, you've got hostels, so it's the all the way from teeny boppers all the way to early college grads, fresh grads, and nothing against them, and they're able to create an application that works and solves a problem pretty amazing. So I had a friend who did voice payments, and again, there were basically three guys in an apartment complex sharing a room. They all had three different jobs, but they would come back at 6 or 7 and they would be coding till 2 in the morning. And so that was a startup. So that's your real competition for those of us who are not in that mode, right? I mean, that's your real competition. So I'll leave it at that. I mean, you can ask me more questions on that, or the audience can. I'll try to address it.
Absolutely. I think, okay, while starting up is in itself a journey, right? Like that is the most difficult, probably the step that you would have taken in your professional career. So, how easy or difficult is scaling up compared to that? So, I know scaling up involves a lot of things. So, can you throw some light on that? How is it easy? Is it difficult? Is it some completely different ball game altogether?
Um, Scaling up, if starting up is way too easy, actually it's become fashionable right now. So especially today, it is extremely easy. When I first started up, it was hard because I still had to get my LAN cables, my servers in my office. I had to set up the desks, I had to set up the PCs, I had to go to the local store, pick up computers, monitors, that were either refurb or used or whatever, to make ends meet and get and I had to find a revenue stream. So we started off with a consulting arm on one end, and then we had a product arm. So we had two things going. The consulting arm would feed revenue, would feed the product arm. So So that was what starting up then was. It was a lot of physical effort. The cloud wasn't there or nowhere near there. So that was a little different. So today, starting up is ridiculously easy, right? Again, like I said, three guys or two guys and a gal in an apartment complex or a shared space are all that it takes to really go after a problem and try to build something, a solution around it. So relatively easy is starting up, and but scaling up is extremely hard. So until you've found the, the exact solution, the problem that you're solving for, and the market fit, and then you pour in the rocket fuel for you to get that escape velocity, um, scaling up is near impossible. Like I said, I've failed more times than I have even tried. So scaling up, I believe, is extremely, extremely hard. You have to be right time, right place. All your stars have to align, and then you need 99% luck and 1% hard work.
I think that about clears the whole confusion behind how difficult or how easy this is. So we have spoken about team, we have spoken about customer acquisition, we have spoken about scaling, but what about staying ahead, right? Like that was also one of the points we wanted to discuss. So uh, like you said, being there at the right time, the right place is, I think, the foremost important thing that you might have. That situation might be the best thing that happens in your startup journey. So, how does one do that? Like, how does one get there to staying ahead?
So I think that you have a very dynamic environment right now. So it's much harder in this current situation to forget getting ahead and staying ahead. So what I mean by that is you can go back, look at the headlines over the last 12 months, post, our entry into the pandemic, and see how many folks have either announced or claimed a pivot, right? So, and across segments, you can see that across, except for crypto, even in crypto, I'm already seeing pivots. I'm already seeing, people providing trading as a service. Yesterday there was one headline on that. So people are moving from being a trading platform to a trading infrastructure all of a sudden, right? So you're already seeing that because there are like half a dozen marketplaces fighting for people's money and bandwidth. And given all the uncertainties, people are thinking, oh, if I power other platforms, I may be better off. So that's one example. But then there are so many. Again, 10-minute grocery delivery. Do I really need groceries in 10 minutes is a different question to answer. But at the same time, you have half a dozen folks claiming real estate there, right? I mean, they're so so it's so dynamic that for you to stay ahead, you have to create a market segment and have a distance between you and the competition so much that how you achieve that is a matter of I would say timing, of sheer vision, of keeping a pulse on your customers' needs. It's me too is probably not the right phrase, but it's copycats won't work, right? So you have to keep a pulse on the customer. Does the customer really need this, and solve for that? And if the customer continues to buy and indicates what their plans are, and you move strategically in the direction they're moving in alignment with them, then you're probably better off. But it's just too broad. I mean, there are too many segments to talk about. So in each segment, you have to go in and focus on some of the pros and cons with that segment. Manufacturing 4.0, the whole conversation will be different. Um, you know, um, you know, Retail, virtual reality, and immersive technology will be different. Zero checkout will be different, right? I mean, then you have in banking, you're going to have a whole number of plays in fintech and fintech related stuff. So those trends will come and go, but are you just another 11th neobank? And then you realize that today neobank is hot and your flavor of the day. 18 months later, you're not neobank anymore. You are like ultra bank or something. So whatever is, so it all depends on each segment, how you identify the longer term game, and what are you playing for, right? I mean, those are all important. I hope that
I
answers
think
the question.
Yeah, I think it does. So, also before going any further, what about the how do you find out, or how do you come about to understanding the problems or the opportunities of a certain sector, right? That's where you know what you want to solve, and that's where you know how. That's how you know you will never go out of uh, fashion. Maybe I don't want to use that word, but then you know you're always going to be the best choice for everybody out there, or all your customers. So how does one know that, like, where
So
is the
yeah,
answer?
that's, I think, one of the best questions. That's really an awesome question. The reason that is important is because there was a time, apparently it's not important anymore, but there was a time, and I still believe if you go back to basics, it's still essential for you to have domain expertise in whatever you're trying to solve. What I mean by that is, an entrepreneur who has personally faced that problem, um, especially in the enterprise solution world, or in the B2B world, particularly. As a consumer, you may face a whole gamut of problems, and you can solve that with technology, and that may give you some, leeway to not be a domain expert necessarily. But as an entrepreneur, if you truly face that problem and you solve for that based on your deep expertise and experience in it, let's say you're in a special class of claims management, or some other kind of insurance underwriting, or you're in the mortgage business in the real estate industry and you see some problems there. And these are all huge verticals, sub verticals, and domains within, large domains. So there are plenty of problems to solve. Example, industry 4.0 problems to solve. There's a company that does a lot of work in that segment and has won a lot of awards, but it's barely in the news these days. It was, for a few years, but then it kind of dropped off the radar. And they're still serving customers, and they're still growing. Not at the hectic pace of some of the newbies, but they're still growing. So that built to outlast culture comes, gets built because you have gone through that yourself. There's no greater domain expertise lying anywhere else other than the core team that you have built, and most of them actually worked with you, either servicing a client overseas, or whatever the scenario may have been, and they say, hey, this is a real problem, and there's a business that can be built around this. So those are scenarios that work very well and are effective, and that can only be gained again by true experience and by having been there, having the knowledge, not necessarily the degree and the education, but more to do with the um, work experience, and the exposure that you got either at a client or somewhere else. And a lot of people have started playing this kind of in a reverse or inverse way. So I looked at a startup story the other day, that was into robotics for automated food manufacturing, that was in the news less than a month ago. And the story the founders told was, had to do with the fact that their kid needed that food at 10 p.m. and they didn't have a restaurant to go to, so they decided to manufacture a bot. I'm like, you know I didn't I didn't know. I didn't have anybody to comment about this with, but my thoughts on that. So you've got this inverse play that people are trying to fill in a story, and that won't really work. I mean, it doesn't resonate at all. So that story has to be real. You should have faced that pain point. Healthcare, right? Lots of different examples in healthcare where people have gone, faced the issue, and said, "Hey, we can solve this. There has to be a better way to do this." So that's fundamentally what you know starting up or entrepreneurship is about, is to find a better way to do it. So
I think that does again cover the whole question, what I wanted to ask. While now we covered quite a few things that we discussed on the first, I think, or the second uh, slide of the PPT. I just wanted to ask you about scaling. We did cover that, but then a little more that you can talk about, right? While we have the scaling bit underway, so we did talk about it. That is, I think, the most difficult part of it all. But how, once we sort of know where we are going, Can you tell me what more is there that probably needs to be covered under the scaling bit?
I think one important point I would put in there is very early on, you may not believe you need it, but you should have systems, processes, and a framework in place to handle business scenarios. So you will have a lot of churn and burn, both in your personnel, as well as in your customers, as well as in your product engineering, right? So what happens is you need to think like a bigger organization, not overburden it with paperwork necessarily, but you need to have enough systems and processes in place so that you are not spitting out half done, half baked goods or products, or you're not addressing a client, you're not listening to your customers. So these are some key areas where you need to prepare, right in that finding that product market fit phase to transitioning to the next level. You need to prepare your organization's culture, you need to prepare the frameworks, and you need to have the right people in place at that time. So people think that you hire a team and you stick with them through the journey. That's not true either. So you have to hire for every phase. So you don't need an expensive lawyer in round one. You have to have the right founders agreement, all those other things, but you don't need to hire them. You can have them you don't need to have them on a retainer basis at that point in time, is what I'm trying to say. So similarly, you hire different sets of teams with different skills or over the phases as you grow, but in preparation for execution or monitoring the execution, course correcting during the execution, and ensuring that customers' needs are met, ensuring that the partners are not, deprived of, something, ensuring that the employees are happy. You've got to make sure all these stakeholders are, coming along with you and riding that with the same enthusiasm and same, positive attitude to win. So you ensure that by putting some structure in place so that there is not a lot of fall throughs, and where it becomes difficult to recover from. You'll always have some, but it shouldn't be so bad that you can't recover from it.
Absolutely.
How's the audience questions?
Yeah, so
Looking.
we are getting some, but none of them are appearing here. I'm taking them off of my phone. That's what I'm looking at
Oh,
time to
okay.
time. So I'm coming to the exit question before I have covered a few from the audience. So I'm taking one from what I have
Sure.
had about exit. So when does one decide it is time, right? Like when does one know? Maybe exit in the terms of letting an investor buy your company off or selling it to another company, or just about stopping. You've been there, you know what it means. So, and you have also been an investor. So, from both points, can you sort of cover that bit?
So purely from closing down, terminating the experiment, if you will, for some reason, I came up with a thumb rule of 18 months, right? I mean, to me, if you have not validated, if you have not found traction, and if you're not moving from traction to scale in 18 months, you should simply shut the experiment down and move on. And, you can call it, gobbledygook, whatever next, and you could be selling pavada versus, chole biryani or whatever it is, and it's okay, and you can reinvent yourself and come with a different idea, with a fresh perspective. But to me, somehow I came up with escape velocity has to be accomplished in 18 months. That's my thing. So I've had a lot of counters during sessions where people have said, this is the seventh year that they're doing something, and it's the same thing that they've been doing for 7 years. They have some customers, they have some traction, but then to me, it almost becomes a lifestyle business at that point in time, right? Anything beyond 3 years, to me, if you're doing the same thing, you've not really scaled, you've not grown, it's a great lifestyle business. You're probably selling kurtis online or whatever it is, and that works for some people, and that's great. There's nothing wrong in it. It's still a business. So that's kind of my take on it. But again, that's for purely from an experiment standpoint. I mean, startups are experiments, but at some point in time, you have to get off experimenting and become a real business, and that's what that journey is all about. So I would say, otherwise, exits are of obviously many kinds. I kept harping for in 18, 19, 20 that we need a mature secondary market. All of a sudden, we have one. So don't ask me why, but I don't know what triggered it. It wasn't investment bankers who triggered it. There's just enough liquidity in the secondary markets now, and there is a demand appetite that is almost insatiable, that you're getting pretty good exits, and that's actually very good for our community as a whole, because that money hopefully will find its way down to invest in some pretty decent problem solving startups. So we, I think, almost post the dot-com bubble, the early days, this is the first time, this year is the first time we are seeing a great secondary market welcoming DHRPs or red herrings, and being positive for a secondary market exit. Then there's always strategic. So now again, there's a lot of headlines. Even today there was one about so-called acqui-hires or reverse mergers, or so to me those are difficult. Those have to be very careful choices, because I think founders will have significant culture clashes in them. I don't think founders are attuned like large enterprises. When there's a merger, and I've been part of a lot of M&As in large enterprises, so there the failings or the gaps kind of get quickly merged and they disappear somehow. Whereas here, the flaws kind of show up or get, it's like looking into it with a microscope all of a sudden. So things are harder to manage, I believe. And there are too many, sort of small huddling of startups that is starting to happen. There's also this notion of, bouquet of brands, right? I mean, this concept, not to mention any names, but a lot of them are trying this, clubbing together a bunch of brands, and hoping that D2C will be more effective when you do that. Again, the processes, the systems, the insights, the leadership, and the management will determine the success of those. So those are some exit options that I could think of, but we can go talk some more based on your questions on it.
Yeah, I think for the questions on exit, there's not many more from the audience. That was mine on exit, and the rest of them, I think we have right about covered from audience and otherwise. So, yeah, I think, how do you find the right people to build? How do you find the right people to build your team with? Who are the right founding team as well? So that was one question.
Um, Definitely hire, or if you're definitely build with people who are way smarter than you, right? I mean, like, I'm talking again 10x smarter than you, right? So because what the other thought process I had, actually this was a thought that crossed my mind today, is what happens is you kind of realize that if you hire mediocrity, or someone who is always looking up to you, then you become sort of the cog in the wheel, and you become, I mean, you have to be, as a founder, co-founder, you have to display the leadership characteristics and set the direction, and charge on. But at the same time, you become the only source of inspiration, direction, and everything, right? So for every step, they look up to you or one of your other co-founders for answers. And when you hire people way smarter than you, what happens is you've given them the broad outline of what it is that you're trying to accomplish, and they find their own path. They will only come to you when there is a anticipated roadblock, or a decision that needs to be made that has consequences and impact. beyond their role. So I think that's very, very critical. So how do you find it's a trial and error. I've fired more people than I've hired in my life. That applies to mistakes I've made in the enterprise, with enterprise resources of billions of dollars. Right? I mean, you're managing large initiatives. You've got the funding to do literally whatever, right? Globally, and when you hire at that pace, at that frenetic pace, you tend to make a lot of mistakes. So judgment errors, definitely several of them. I mean, and then you kind of were hoping something would work out. You looked at the profile and went through the typical HR process, but then the person showed up on site, and it was a different story. So, but I've the American culture is ingrained in me, so I kind of look at firing as a part of the process. I'm not hesitant at all. I mean, and I cut my losses very early and often rather than drag it out. That's my approach. It doesn't sit well with a lot of folks, but I prefer that route.
Sorry. Yeah, absolutely.
You're on mute again.
Yeah, that was a slight issue there. Yeah, if that works, that works, right? As simple as that. So we have come to the end of questions from the audience and mine as well. So we have, if you have anything to say as I think closing points, I think we should cover that before we go on to close. I'll also, after any closing points, I'll bring up the last slide so that people can just take a look at that as well, right?
Sure. So I think this is there are no shortcuts. I think that's a very important message. Um, um, the notion of what a startup is should be very clear. That it is an experiment. So I think that a lot of people think that startup is an alternative career or an alternate to go work somewhere 9 to 5. So for the younger folks who are just graduating, I would say that I would prefer that people work 4 to 5 years in an enterprise or a set of enterprises, get that exposure, and then if they're interested in solving a problem and trying their hand at starting up something, is a good, I would say that's a good transition rather than jumping into it, unless you're really sure about a number of things lining up for you. The the other thing that I found, I've not gotten answers from founders who are pitching, is the reason they're doing something, right? They, like I said, I have a lot of examples where people try to weave a story on how they ended up starting up something, but there wasn't really a strong enough foundation in why they wanted to start up. So the basis itself to starting up is so weak that it falls flat, pretty early, because there isn't enough. It just takes a rhetoric from a spouse, or it takes a comment from your parents, or some other family member or friends for you to say, oh, maybe I shouldn't be doing this. Let me go and try a 9 to 5 job or a gig or a freelance opportunity or whatever it is as an alternate. So, like I said, it's harder than chewing glass in my view. A lot of people seem to think it's a walk in the park these days, and it's working out for them as far as the news headlines go. So it may be. I mean, maybe things have changed that I don't realize. Maybe I have to learn something there. So I might go back to the street to ask forgiveness and find the right answers. But I think it's very, very hard, and it shouldn't be something people take that step as a very trivial matter. It should be something thought through. That's pretty much it. That's all I had to share. And those are some observations from everyday life in the startup world.
I think that makes a lot of sense. I'm actually bringing your last slide up for anybody if they want to take your details down and probably reach out to you personally. We have a few folks on LinkedIn watching us. So if they want to do this, you can find Sridhar on LinkedIn. He's one of the most active people I have spoken to. He does post a few anecdotes every now and then. So you definitely have to follow him. for that. I think that's about it, Sridhar. I do not have any more questions from the audience or from me. We would like to close it, I believe. Thank you so much for being a part of this. This was a fun conversation, as always. I think more than anything, I do learn a lot from every conversation that I have with you about the whole ecosystem and also about a certain point. So I hope our audience also took back something like similar to what I did right now. Thank you so much to the audience as well. I hope you had a good session here. And if you have any more questions for Sridhar, please look him up on LinkedIn, and you can ask him directly there. I think that should do.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me. It was a pleasure.
Thank you, Sridhar. Thank you. Bye.
Take care.